Okay, welcome back, and we are in part 2 where we'll actually start doing some texturing. If you have not watched part 1, I highly recommend it. So this is the app that we'll be using online. This is great. It's sort of a junior version or lighter version of Photoshop, but it's very, very, very capable. Alright, so I'm going to scroll down on the main page here and open up the editor. And you've got a couple choices here. I'm going to choose Open Image from Computer, and I'm going to go ahead and go to my project folder. This is why it's a good idea to have a project folder. And I'm going to open up my UV Factory Unwrap.ping. And there it is. Okay, so I recommend dragging out your image window here to save some space. I'm going to close the promotion window, and I like to move my history window over here on the side. And that way I can take my layers toolbar here and I can go ahead and drag it down so I can actually see more layers. Before I get started, I'm going to rename my first layer. It's right now called layer 0, so I just double left click and I'll simply just call this UV. And I can then go ahead and click here. Let's see. So there's this little checkbox here that allows you to turn on and off this here. And I used to know how to lock a layer, and unfortunately, I don't remember how to do that anymore. Okay, I will figure that out. Okay, so basically, the reason why I wanted to lock this layer here is because I didn't want anything to happen to it. So just make sure that you really are never, ever, ever painting on your UV layer, doing anything like that. Okay, so moving on. You need some textures now. So what I've done for my students is I've made this Google Doc that has a small collection of texture websites. So for the rest of you, if you're watching this, you can just pause the video and Google the names of these sites. You can also just Google free texture sites and find your textures. So there's a bunch here, but for instance, if I go to this last one here, this is one of my personal favorites. You generally want textures that have no perspective, so they're orthogonal, so they're straight on. So for instance, if I was coming over here and I went to brick, and I went to damage, I can now go ahead and find this one here, and you'll see that it gives me a really nice little description. Here's the whole image, here's a zoomed in view, and there's 2 for this category. For this particular website, you have 2 different versions. The bigger one here it's larger, so it's even higher quality. See, for my students, you can definitely download the smaller one. Those are plenty big for our needs. I think the best texture sites are the ones that have nice, categories over here, and this one does and has a really lot of great ones. So what I've also done, sorry, let me get back to my desktop. What I've also done is inside my project folder, I made a textures folder, and you can see that I've already downloaded them here. And I'm just going to go ahead and rename this one here. And it's always a good idea to name your textures, especially if you're going to be downloading quite a few. It speeds up the process so much instead of saving them with the names that the internet has given them. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to do the brick texture first. So the way we bring that in is we simply come up here to the layer menu, and under the layer menu I'm going to choose Open Image as Layer. I'm going to go to my textures folder, and I can find things so much faster now. Say open, and it comes in. Okay, so you can see here that my brick texture is quite a bit bigger. I'm going to start by renaming my layer there. Okay, so now the two tools that we're going to be using in Pixlr is the Move tool, so we can just move it all around. And then we're also going to need to do Edit, and we're going to choose Free Transform. And that's going to give us these little blue handles going around it. And if we hold down the Shift key and we go to one of the four corners, you'll see that it lets me size up the layer just fine. Now what happens if I don't hold down Shift? Well, then you're going to distort it, or you could distort it, and it'll look really, could look really terrible. If you do this, just click outside, and then if it asks you if you want to apply, you'll just say no. Okay, so I'm going to go back to Free Transform, hold down the Shift key, drag it in, and bring it in here. Okay, so I'm going to pause for just a second and click outside and say yes. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in with my scroll wheel. I'm going to pan by holding down the space bar. And I want to talk to you about texture size. Now, what I'm going to do is I want to basically be able to see through my brick a little bit so you can actually see the object here. So we have to talk about texture size or texture scale. So if you look at this, if I put this here on the edge here, you can see, let's compare it to the doorway. So if we look here, you can see that if I count the rows of bricks, so like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so by the time it hits the top of the door, I might get to about 12 bricks high, or maybe 14 bricks high. Well, if you think about a door is maybe 6.5, maybe 7 feet high, maybe even higher. And a brick is only about 1.5 inches high, maybe 2 inches high. Well, there's no way that this doorway is going to be 14 bricks high. Those would be really tall bricks. So even though it looks like it could match right here, and even though some beginners might think, oh, I'm going to make this square fit perfectly into this box right here because that just makes sense, it's not realistic, and you're going to have these ginormous bricks. And if that's what you're going for, great, but it's not realistic at all. So one more note is that when you're looking at textures, just going back to the textures here, if you can find seamless ones, that's fantastic. So for instance, if I click on, this one doesn't quite have it, unfortunately. Some of these are seamless. On this site, you'll see that they're seamless. And so these are great because then if you have to duplicate the layers, they're going to come out pretty darn perfect. So that's really great. Unfortunately, you won't find seamless on every website. You won't find seamless of the textures you want. But this one works. Okay, so how do I actually get my brick to be the right size? So one trick you can do is you can select your layer, and then you can click on this little button down here in the bottom left. And now I can change the opacity. So I can lower the opacity, and I can go ahead and I can see it right there. Another thing you can do, let me just see if this looks any better. Let's see, I would want like multiply, there we go. So another thing you can do without lowering opacity, if you don't like that, is click on the same little button down here and leave the opacity at 100%. Come here where it says mode and it says normal, and these are a whole bunch of, these are more advanced, but you can choose an option called multiply, and multiply lets you kind of see through your layer, kind of like it's semi-transparent, so I can see the lines, and everything's just darker and more vivid. So if that works better for your eyes, do it. Just make sure you change it back to normal before you finish up. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to Edit. I'm going to do Free Transform, and I'm going to go ahead now and scale it down. Now, this is where there's a little bit of guessing. And so I'm just kind of placing it right there. This might not work out perfectly. Like, in other words, I might not get 1, 2, 3 over here. I might not even get 2 over here. it might be 2.5 or 2.25. So I might have to do some little trickery. We'll see. Okay, so this is where you're doing a little guessing. If you know the height of your actual object and you say, okay, this building is 20 feet high, and you know that the bricks are 2 inches high, you could do some quick math here and figure out roughly how many bricks high your building is. And that's actually a pretty good exercise. And then you could count it out and you could do that. The other thing you could do is just flat out guess. And then you bring that over into Blender and you'll see if you're correct or not. All right, so I'm going to move things along here. I'm going to go ahead and go kind of small. And again, this is just kind of guesstimating here. And notice that my texture is going outside and into the doorway here. That's okay, because the door is going to be UV mapped with a different texture, so that's not going to hurt at all. I'm going to click outside, and I'm going to go ahead and say yes. Okay, so that's pretty good there. Now, I could stop here, and I could bring it over into Blender, and I could check this. That's actually probably a pretty smart thing to do. So I'm going to go ahead and just try that right now as a UV test. So I'm going to do File, Save. Now normally you would save your project as a PXD file, and that is how you save all your layers. And I'll go ahead and I'll do that in a moment. For now I'm going to save it as a ping, and I'm going to change the name from UV Factory Unwrap. I'm going to go ahead and change it to UV Factory Test. And I'll say OK, and I'll save it. I'm going to go back into my house project. Okay, so it's going into my house project. I'm going to go ahead and hit save, and there it goes. And I'm going to leave Pixlr open because I know I'm going to probably have to make changes. Oops. Okay, so here it is here. So now I'm going to see if this all works, at least on the front face there. All right, so I'm going to come over here on the right, and I'm going to click on the material panel, and you'll see that my object already has a material, and that's because this was actually made out of the default cube inside Blender. Now what I would do is I would get rid of this name, and I would call it factory or something like that. If you don't see a material, like if it looks like this, you can just go ahead and hit new. Okay, so that's fine. If you're one of my students and you already see the material there, you can just use that material and you can keep going. Okay, that's fine. So I'm going to rename this, and I'm just going to call it Factory Matte. There we go. Okay, so now that I have my factory material, I'm going to now go to my textures panel, and it also has a texture as well. And you know what I'm actually going to do is, even though Blender gave me a material and gave me a texture, I'm going to actually delete those. So I'm sorry, I'm going backwards here. I apologize. Okay, so to delete a material, you have to be in object mode. So I just pressed tab, went back into object mode, came back here to the materials, and clicked on the little minus symbol and deleted the material. You'll see that in the browser it's still there, but it's got a little 0 next to it, and that means that no object is using that material right now. So now I'm going to make a brand new material, and I'm going to go ahead and call this, I can't call it Factory Matte because I already did have one. So I'll just call this Factory Matte 2 for now. And I apologize about that. I must be tired. Okay, so there it is there. Now I'll go to my texture. I'll say new, and I'll call this Factory Text. Okay, so there we go. The reason why I did that and backed up a couple steps is because when you create your material and your texture from scratch, um, Blender now sets a couple of other settings up for you automatically because it sees the UV unwrapping. It knows about the UV unwrapping, and so it takes care of a couple little minor things. And so I do think this is faster. So right now it says that it's waiting for an image or movie type, and there's no preview because I actually have to open it up. So right here where it says image, I'm just going to choose open. I'm going to go to my desktop and go to my project folder, and I'm going to find my image here. You can also click on this little button here that has 4 squares, and that will allow you to see your thumbnails here, and I can see the one with the brick here. So I'm going to go ahead and load that one up, and there it is. I now want to tab into edit mode. To see my texture actually show up here in my UV window, I need to come down to the bottom of my UV window, click on the little browse images, and I'm going to choose my factory test. So there it is down there. I can press A and deselect all so it's not lit up. And then over here in my 3D window, I'm going to also press the letter T to hide that toolbar. I don't need it. To see it over here, I'm going to press Z, and I'm going to choose material. And so now I should be able to see it. The problem is my lighting is not very good. So I'm going to get back into object mode. I'm going to select my light, and I'll bring it over here, and now you can see that I can actually see it. So with texturing, let me see, if I do texture, yeah, it doesn't get any brighter. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to change my light. I'm going to select my light, and I'm going to come over here to the right hand side, click on my light panel, and I'm going to change it to a sun. That makes, I could do a Hemi also. Actually, Hemi's pretty nice, pretty evenly lit, and Hemi just works just for texturing. I could have chosen a sun as well, but I didn't want to. There we go. I could have chosen sun, but I didn't want to have to rotate the light, so I just chose Hemi, and it's just a good even one. So you can see here that the brick texture is coming in. It looks pretty good. You can also see on the side here, you're actually seeing the UV map here. So you see those lines, that's the UV map. And of course that's hopefully going to all get covered up by your textures. So you kind of have to make a decision here. Does this work? Does this look okay? And I think it does. It looks pretty reasonable. So I'm going to give it the thumbs up. Okay, good. So I'm going to flip back now down to my texture here. And because I know that this is the right size, or I feel pretty good about it, I'm going to change the mode back to normal. And now I can't see through it anymore. You want to make sure you change the opacity of your brick back to 100% or change the mode back to normal, because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to duplicate the heck out of this and then you don't want your settings to be all wrong. Alright, so here's how we do it. And then I'm going to stop this because this video is getting on for a while. So I'm going to right mouse click over here and I'm going to choose duplicate layer. You can also come up here simply to the layer menu and you could choose duplicate layer here. I was hoping there would be like folders over here that you could make, but I think I'm wishing for too much here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the layer. It creates a brick copy. It's directly on top of itself. And now we'll just kind of go ahead and stack. And so we can do something like that. Again, go ahead and continue. Now you'll see that I can go ahead and if you guys discover a faster way of doing this, please let me know. So a little tip, you'll see that I'm getting, even though this is seamless, what I'm getting is I'm getting this chunk taken out. I kind of wish maybe I didn't choose this texture now. I'm sort of having texture regret. So you can see that there. One thing that I can do is I can, to at least make it not so bad, is I can move this layer down a little bit, and then I can lower this layer so I can drag it below. And because I dragged it below, it's actually now going behind. Hopefully you can see that. It's going behind, so I can actually hide that chunk. So that's kind of a little hack, little trick. I can maybe hide this one as well, make it go down a little bit, move the layer down on the list a little bit so it's a little hidden. I was hoping that since these were seamless that they would be, you know, pretty spot on. So the problem now is that if you look at my brick here, you'll see that it has a chunk taken out. I probably should have told you that early on. I'm sorry about that. So now my brick has this chunk taken out. So I'm not really thrilled about that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. And again, I'm just going to go ahead and put these like that. Okay, so what do I do? What do I do when I get to the middle portion here? Well, I'm just going to go ahead and copy this like that. This is kind of why I suggested that you bring your whoops, I realize that doesn't matter at all. Okay. All right, so there we go. So that's looking all right. So I've got a bunch of brick layers here. So we need to save this project. So I'm going to do File. I'm going to do Save. And I'm going to make sure I save it now as a PXD. You want to do that before, and I'm going to change this to Tests. I'm going to change it from Test, sorry. And I'm going to call this a UV Factory, and I'm going to save this back as my unwrap. But it's going to be a PXD. I'm going to say OK, and I'm going to save this inside. If your screen looks like this, I recommend you click on the little downward arrow. Make sure you go to your desktop, go to your project folder, and I'm going to save this right here into my project folder so everything's all nice and neat and tidy. Okay, so if I could go back and turn back time, which I absolutely could, but I'm not going to do for you, because I don't want the video to go on any longer, is I could go ahead and I could download a better texture that does not have a chunk taken out of it, because I don't want that feature to repeat itself. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to now finish up by doing all of the rest of the bricks. So it's really just repeating for these guys over here. I'll pause the video and I'll finish up, and I'll do all these other little strips, and then I'll talk about how I handle some of these smaller details. But everything is basically the same. So I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.